My name is Michael Wyand, CEO of Oxeia Biopharma. I want to thank everyone for joining today. And I was very excited to walk you through what Oxeia is doing in the area of concussion. I wanted to start out with one question today and ask the question, how many drugs are FDA approved right now to treat concussion? And I think the answer is 0, none. There's not one drug that's been approved for concussion. And that's what I'm here to talk to you about. And one of the ways I always start to think about the work we're doing in concussion is to think about the patients and their journeys with this concussion brain injury. And we have a story on our website, Tara Restivo, who has been on our website for a while. And I think she's very typical of the people that we hear, and we get emails every week from people who have had either their children themselves, their parents, who have experienced this injury and the ways that it affects their life. And Tara tells the story of going to Florida. She was going to look at some property down there. She lived in Northern Virginia, and she was in a real estate office. She tripped on the carpet and fell face first into the desk, rolled off the desk on the back of her head, and knocked herself out. They took her to the emergency room, where she spent hours and hours being evaluated, imaging, and they came back to her with the good news that she had a concussion. And they were going to release her. They told her she could not fly home for 10 days, but that she would just go back and rest. So she left the emergency room. Her husband flew down. They waited. And the next day, she started having vision problems, slurring her words. She was dizzy. And they decided to bring her back to the emergency room. So they reevaluated her and then sent her back. And she waited and waited for the 7 days that was left to go back and to be able to get on the plane and fly home. When she flew home, she was lucky enough to get to a post-concussion clinic. She still did not feel at all in control of her faculties and her brain function. And she went to the post-concussion clinic, and the doctor there said, do you have squirrels in your backyard? She said, yes. He said, I want you to sit down in front of the window, pick out a single squirrel, and don't take your eyes off that squirrel. And that's a form of treatment for visual problems associated with concussion. I tell this story especially because of the suffering that Tara had, but also to tell you that's the state of the art with treating people with concussion, since there are no effective therapies or therapies at all that have been approved, and they're just not available. People are told to go home and rest, and they're not really told what to do. So their journey is very disturbing, because when they do not get any better, they don't have a lot of answers, and they're pretty scared about what to do next. So I want to talk to you, the people that are watching, the people that are thinking about whether to invest in Oxeia, about what these patients experience, what they go through. And I want to let you know how much this is important to myself and the people at Oxeia, and why we're kind of in this field. Concussions were first described by a person named Edwin Papyrus in Egypt in 1700 BC. And if you look at the symptoms they described, they are very similar to what we would describe today. A blow to the head, confusion, inability to think, dizziness, difficulty walking, all the things that we see today. So fast forward to 2026, almost 4,000 years later, and we still don't have an approved treatment. And I think that's a very long time to wait. And it creates a huge unmet medical need, as we'll discuss in a minute. And so why, you might ask, why has this been ignored? And I think one of the reasons is because the brain is invisible to us. It's inside our skulls. It's away from what we can observe. It's very difficult to test. And concussion is a type of injury that is not associated with the types of damage that you can see with an X-ray machine or a CT scan. So it's even invisible to those types of devices. It's not associated with severe wounds, penetrating wounds to the head. More severe forms of TBI can have obviously very much damage done to the brain. That's fairly easy to see and very difficult to deal with. But with concussion, there's not a lot of damage that's visible. And for years, if you were injured, let's take athletes. My two boys played football. My daughter played softball and field hockey. At that time, if you were injured and you could stand up and go back on the field to play, the players, the fans, the coaches thought you were a hero. If you twisted your knee and you were having trouble walking and limping, they whisked you off the field and said, my God, you got to get an x-ray because your knee may be injured. So because it's invisible, we just haven't approached it in the way that we do other things that we can see. And that's where our tagline is, rest is not enough. So what does all this mean? What it means is that there's a population of millions of Americans who have been failed by the current standard of care and are desperately reaching out to us because they have no one else to ask. And we get these emails that sent on a weekly basis. They want to know if they can participate in trials. And it's a huge unmet medical need that really needs to be addressed, as I said earlier. Under our current trial criteria, we're treating patients that are within 30 days of their injuries. And why is that? Because what we want to do is, instead of letting people stay in a dark room or in their basement for 2 to 3 weeks, we want to be able to treat them before they get into that persistently symptomatic condition that they're in, where their brains aren't functioning and they're kind of on pause. So we're treating patients within that first 30 days to prevent the onset of persistent symptoms. And I think if you take anything away from this discussion we have and you're evaluating Oxeia, it's not so much the size of the market that's an issue. It's a very large market. The question is whether we can develop our drug to work for them. And that's what we're doing with the funds that we're raising. It's a journey that we've been on. It's a mission that we're on, and we're asking you to join our mission and help out with the funding of that trial. Now, here's what we're doing, and here's some of the parameters that we're looking at. About 80% of people that get a diagnosis of concussion, they will, within 3 to 5 days, 3 to 7 days, look like they're pretty much back to a normal functioning status. We know from some very sophisticated imaging that the actual changes in your brain don't really disappear until at least 90 days after a concussion, even your first concussion. The other 20 to 30% who don't get better, that represents about 1.4 to 4.2 million patients. Their headaches don't go away, resting isn't fixing them, their memory and personality changes are off, and they're really getting, in many cases, no clear guidance of what to do next, and it's very scary for them. In our first study, it took people an average of 23 days to get to the post-concussion clinic where we ran our study. And so that means that these folks are, 3 weeks, as I said, in a dark room or in the basement, wondering what they should be doing this for, or what they should do. So here's where we're unique. Our approach, we're using a naturally occurring small peptide hormone called ghrelin, and our name for it, it's the same ghrelin molecule, is OXE103, and we may refer to it as that. We signed a license with Daiichi Sankyo, a very large Japanese pharmaceutical company, who had been doing work after the ghrelin peptide was discovered in the late 90s. And they had started doing studies with one of the first properties that had been identified with the molecule, and that is it increases hunger. And it was actually dubbed in the very beginning the hunger hormone. We approached them to use it for the neurologic indications that we're studying, concussion, and they were willing to license it to us. They had done, in the course of their initial work with the molecule, as a lot of big pharmas do, they generated a huge amount of data. They treated more than 300 patients. And in the safety studies that you do that are called phase 1, they did 4 of those safety trials. They did the next step, which is the phase 2 trial, which is done in patients to look at early activity. They did 4 phase 2 studies, and they did 1 phase 3 study as well. And all of that information was submitted to the FDA in what we call an IND, and it represents probably over $100 million worth of data. And that's data that, through our license, we didn't have to do, because we had a meeting with the FDA. We told them about the open IND at the FDA, and they agreed that we did not have to do any additional work to be able to move our program forward with ghrelin OXE103 into concussion patients. And so that was a big step forward for the company. We essentially went from 0 to 60 That data is, like I said, over $100 million in data. We didn't have to raise that money to get to this point in our development pathway, which has been a huge advantage. And that uniqueness passes to our current investors because we didn't have to raise that huge amount of money, our valuation as a company today is much lower. Right now, we're at $50 million with our crowdfunding raise. So it's a nice, unique part to what our position is to raise our money. Let me talk a little bit about exactly what's happening in the brain when you get a concussion. The first thing that happens is you get either a direct blow, direct hit to your head, or an indirect hit. And an indirect hit is a whiplash injury where you get hit in your body and your head snaps back and forth. And what happens there is your brain inside your skull is bouncing back and forth against both sides of the walls of your skull. And what happens is all of the neurons, when you either get that direct or indirect blow, they fire at the same time. And sometimes you'll see athletes on the field in a game, their hands and arms will be trembling immediately after they get hit. And that is what we call a depolarization event, which is the brain firing off all the cells in the brain. And what happens there is that firing of all the brain cells is like draining the battery. All of the energy in the brain just disappears. And I didn't learn this for a while, and when I learned it, I was very impressed by it. Our bodies, 20% of the energy that our bodies burn each day is burned by our brain. And most of us think if you want to go out and burn calories, you got to go out and run, you got to move, you got to jump. But thinking and the rest of the things that our brain does for controlling our body is actually burning 20% of the energy. And when the brain does not have that energy, then a lot of bad things start to happen because the brain has to keep moving to be able to function and take care of the activities that need to keep us alive. So it has to keep functioning. And when it does that in the absence of energy, it causes these reactive oxygen species to form. And those reactive oxygen species are toxic to the neurons. So the neurons do not function well. And you see that immediately when we see it a lot with athletes. When an athlete tries to stand up and start walking, they can't do it. It's an immediate onset of the dysfunction of the neurons in our brain because of that lack of energy from the complete depolarization event and draining of the battery. And the other thing it does is it damages the little pieces of the cells that create energy. So as we take in food and we start to generate and send energy to the brain, it's difficult for those cells to regenerate the energy. So if we look at what the ghrelin molecule does, again, our OXE103, one of the things it does is it increases those little bodies that create the energy in the brain. It increases the number of those and their activity, so more energy is produced. It specifically acts to reduce the reactive oxygen species that are toxic to the neurons. And there's a second part of the injury that I haven't talked about, but it's just as important. If you can imagine your brain bouncing back and forth within your skull, your brain is a little soft. It's not hard like a block. That movement and stretching stretches the wiring that connects between the different cells in the brain. And that disturbs a lot of pathways that are important for us, such as memory, such as thinking, such as operating different parts of our body. And that stretching injury can lead to what we call a connectivity issue. So the impulses that send information is being interrupted and it's not working well. So ghrelin has been demonstrated to show an outgrowth in these connections in the brain. So it's very useful. And part of what's been studied with that is how it increases memory formation and other things. So in short, it helps the brain recharge the battery. And that is something that is very important from protecting the brain from being continuously damaged with further and further damage from the toxicity, but it's also important for the healing process to get. And I might add that ghrelin is a peptide, a small peptide hormone. It's in the same group of hormones as the GLP-1s, and we hear about the GLP-1s relative to weight loss and now all the other indications that they're being licensed for almost every day. But it's in that family. And what's so important about that family is they regulate the metabolic processes in our body. And ghrelin is on the side of bringing in food, and the GLP-1s are on the side of decreasing appetite, so they decrease food. So they're kind of working in opposite directions. And if you look at the if you look at the ghrelin molecule, that's very, very clear at what it's doing, and it's very well matches with what we see with concussive injury. So we're very excited about this and the potential for it to be used as a concussion therapeutic, the first concussion therapeutic. We just completed a phase 2A study at the University of Kansas Medical Center, which is our first study. It's a pilot study. We studied the same population, persistently symptomatic people within 30 days of their injury. We looked at how they responded to the treatment. We looked at the different tools we used to measure their symptom scores. Studies like this, the first phase 2 study, and by phase 2, we mean that we're treating active patients. The safety studies in phase 1 treat usually normal patients to see the safety. And what we learned with this is very important to do these studies, because then we take that information and design our phase 2 study. And so when we ran that study, we saw an 85% responder rate in the treated patients with OXE103 compared to a 33% response rate in the standard of care. And this actually was a very significant and robust response that we saw. And to our knowledge, that's the first time that we had a study run with concussion that was in the process of being submitted and walking through the process with the FDA that showed an effect like this. So it's a robust signal. Dr. Jared Grant, who's head of neurosurgery at Duke, I went down to Duke and showed them the data, and we met with their scientists, and they were very excited to take it forward into the phase 2 study. So it was exciting data for us to do that. Again, phase 2A study, the pilot study, it's proof of concept. It tells us we should run a bigger trial. It doesn't tell us that this drug will necessarily work at scale, and that's what the phase 2B will do, is give us that. The phase 2B is a very large inflection point for this company. We will be treating 160 to 200 patients. There'll be multiple sites involved across the country, 10 to 15 sites. It will take us about 18 months from the time that we start the trial till the time that we evaluate all the data and then have that data available for the next step in our development. And since this hasn't been done before, we're really pioneering this space. So it's very exciting to get ready to start that. We're doing some things with the FDA and going to have some FDA meetings around the endpoint that we're using, which is a 22 symptom scale. And we are in the process of validating that endpoint. And we'll have that discussion with the FDA. So all of those activities that we're doing are all part of moving the phase 2B trial. And I think that it's going to determine whether a drug like this can help people like Tara and all the millions of people that are in the process of trying to get through this, the horrible outcomes that some of these people have. So what I'd like to do is stop there, and we can start to look at some of the questions that are available. And I don't know if we got these. I see them coming in. Let me see. Are there any questions from any of you out there? I'm taking a look to see. All viewers. Question, congrats on a clinical trial. Have you considered a combination of CBD? There's certainly a number of psychoactive drugs that you could think of potentially could help, especially in being able to kind of help rewire the brain. I think at this stage of our development, we're very focused on trying to get the approval for OXE103 and demonstrate to the FDA exactly what the effect is and how it can be used in various patient populations. So I don't see us doing combination trials right now. Once the drug was approved, that certainly could be part of combination trials to go in the future. And whatever psychoactive drugs have been talked about quite a bit recently, and it's I think it goes to show you how the brain is the last frontier, and the treatments for it are going to be the next exciting things that we're going to deal with, and they're all going to deal with the wiring of the brain and how it operates. So, question coming in from Kenneth Galanti: what will be the timeline if successful for approval? So this trial, the phase 2B trial, is a trial that normally to get approval for a drug, you run 2 phase 3 trials. So this phase 2b trial, based on the validation work we're doing and the design of the trial, we believe will be the same design as we would use in the phase 3 trial. And so we would like to think that if this trial is successful, there's a possibility, and that's just a possibility, no guarantees, that this could be considered the first phase 3 trial. To start the next phase 3 trial after that for approval would be another 18 months. And so you could tack 18 months on the end of our trial. And that would be, I think, a reasonable proxy for saying when you would have sufficient data to be able to get approval with the FDA. And once you submit the trial, then the data from the trial, they get a chance to review it and prove it. And it's a back and forth between you and the FDA. So it looks like that's it for the questions at this time. We'll be happy. We will answer all the questions, any questions that you submit to the live stream. Before we wrap up, just wanted to remind you that there are no drugs for concussion. The answer to my question was 0. For Tara and the rest of the people who are out there with persistent symptomatic symptoms and post-concussion syndrome, they're still waiting for someone to give them their brain back. So we want to get this done very diligently. If you want to be part of this team, our round is open at invest.oxeabiopharma.com. That's OXEIA biopharma.com. The link is in the description and it's pinned to the chat. You can read our Form C. It has all of the information about what we're doing. It has all of the risks and the other disclosures that are typically given for investors so they understand what that risk is. We want you to understand the risks, and we want you to invest only what you can afford. And so 2 weeks today, we're also having another person on our team, Alex Smith, the quarterback, professional athlete, will join us. He's going to talk about what concussions actually cost him on and off the field. And until then, keep sending us emails. And as we've said in the beginning of this, the patients are the main thing for us. And we read every one of them that we get from the patients and every one of them that we get from our investors and interested folks. So thank you very much for listening. I hope it was useful for you.